You're too stupid to tell me what to think.
Fire, 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 fire. Now you've heard it. Not shouted in a crowded theatre, admittedly, as I realize I seem now to have shouted it in the Hogwarts dining room. To whom you would delegate the task of deciding for you what you could read, to whom you would give the job of deciding for you, relieve you of the responsibility of hearing what you might have to hear. Do you know anyone? Hands up. Do you know anyone to whom you'd give this job? Does anyone have a nominee? You mean there's no one in Canada good enough to decide what I can read or hear? I had no idea. But there's a law that says there must be such a person, or there's a subsection of some piddling law that says it. Well, the hell with that law then. It's inviting you to be liars and hypocrites and to deny what you evidently know already. But who is the one under threat? The person who promulgates this and says, I'd better listen because if I don't, I'm in danger? Or me, who says, no, I think this is so silly you could even publish a cartoon about it? And up go the placards, and up go the yells and the howls and the screams. Behead those. This is in London. This is in Toronto. This is in New York. It's right in our midst now. Behead those who cartoon Islam. Do they get arrested for hate speech? No. Might I get in trouble for saying what I've just said about the Prophet Muhammad? Yes, I might. Where are your priorities, ladies and gentlemen? You're giving away what's most precious in your own society, and you're giving it away without a fight, and you're even praising the people who want to deny you the right to resist it. Shame on you while you do this. Make the best use of the time you've got left. This is really serious.
Free speech aside? Free speech aside? 75 people gather in Garland, Texas to discuss free speech and, yes, highly offensive content. And the New York Times staff is saying, free speech aside, why would anyone do something so provocative? I don't know, maybe it's because people like you say free speech aside. You are just as much a threat to our liberties as the terrorists are. You outnumber them a millionfold. You're what Salman Rushdie calls the butt brigade.
I've got so sick of the goddamn butt brigade. And now, the moment somebody says, yes, I believe in free speech, but, I stop listening.
There are no buts in free speech, okay? Every time someone says there is one, we have to extinguish it. This fight is in the butt, all right? And when someone says you can't draw a cartoon of Muhammad, I say, yes, I can. I can draw, I can think, I can say whatever I want. And as soon as we're told not to, that's where we have to focus, okay? Free speech is not about saying cats are better than dogs. It's not about acceptable speech. It's on the forefront where the settlements are, okay? That's where the fight is. You're allowed to say, Judeo-Christian culture is better than Islamic culture. And if someone has a problem with that, that's their problem. You know, I'm offended every day. When I wake up and get out of bed, I'm perpetually outraged. The 9/11 truthers offend me. I cringe to think of what the families must go through having to hear these ridiculous theories. But we need people like that, looking under rugs, investigating things. We need the skeptics. We need the curious. I want art to be totally free. I hate piss Christ. I don't enjoy seeing in a country where 85% people are Christian, I don't like seeing their prophet submerged in urine. Okay? I didn't enjoy seeing the Virgin Mary made out of elephant dung. But because freedom is higher on the scale than my personal beliefs, I don't want anyone to get hurt for it. How did we get here? The key here is, okay, the motives don't matter. If you were being offensive just to be offensive for no good reason whatsoever, that is still your right. It's like our buddy Ezra Levant says.
It's because it's my bloody right to do so. And it's my right to do so for reasonable intentions, and it's my right to do so for extremely unreasonable purposes.
He's right, and it is his right. And we don't put free speech aside when we discuss this. If you put free speech aside, you're missing the whole point of living in a free society.
Wow, yeah, because religious freedom doesn't cover stuff like that. The First Amendment only applies to you if you don't insult America. They absolutely have the right to build their mosque near Ground Zero. They would have the right to build it on Ground Zero if they owned the land. They would have the right to build a monument to the hijackers of 9/11 and a giant mural of all of the victims of 9/11 roasting in hell if they wanted to. That's freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means that sometimes incredible assholes win. But that's okay, because this is America, and we can flip those assholes the bird and we can criticize them as much as we want and as roundly as we want. But the second we start talking about taking their rights away, this is no longer America. This is some other country where unpopular opinion is stifled. Unpopular opinion is exactly what the First Amendment of the United States of America is designed to uphold. The mob doesn't need protection. The majority opinion doesn't need protection. The minority opinion does. Even if the KKK bought the birthplace of Martin Luther King Jr. and turned it into a monument to Adolf Hitler, would that be despicable? Yes. Would it be permissible? Yes. Because this is America. And in America, the assholes are allowed to win. The unpopular ideas are allowed to win. And that's good. Because a lot of good ideas are unpopular. And yes, there are bad ideas that are unpopular too. But how do you stop the bad ideas without also stopping the good ideas? No one has the right to commit violence against their fellow man. That's a given. But if you want to pray to a God and call him Allah, and you want to believe that he said this and he said that, you can do that. And I can disagree adamantly. But what I cannot do is tell you what you can build and where, because this is fucking America and But I support your right to say what you're saying.
I'm wondering, I want to talk to you today a little bit about the current state of freedom of speech in Canada, and we're currently in a post-C51 world. Where are we at with the state of freedom of speech, and how many, just how far have the civil liberties been eroded after C51's been introduced?
Well, you know, it's a fascinating question, in part because nobody actually knows. So one of the things about C51, one of the many things, remembering that this is an omnibus national security bill, and so it touches just about every aspect of the national security landscape in Canada. When we're talking specifically about the Criminal Code speech provisions, we're looking at language that no Canadian has ever seen before. So we now have a provision, an amendment to the Criminal Code, that would criminalize the advocacy, even in private, not necessarily broadcast, of terrorism in general. That's the language, terrorism in general. There is not a lawyer in this country who can tell you what that means. So the point here is we have something that's on its face ordinary Canadians can't even grapple with. We are in a terrible place relative to freedom of expression at this time.
Well, a term like that seems so incredibly broad that it could be brushed upon anybody. And I think they're starting to... we're starting to see this. There's a number of cases recently. There's somebody in Toronto who may be facing charges for offending some feminists on Twitter. There was a man in Quebec who may be facing charges for saying something offensive to a police officer. That Ezra Levant from Sun Media, like him or hate him, that's another story, but he was recently charged $80,000 for calling an organization crazy. This is kind of like a hate crimes or something here in Canada. How much freedom of speech do we have left here when people like that are being charged just for speaking their minds?
Well, again, when you say charge, there's a raft of different things going on. So we have a number of issues here. Some of them are civil liability. Our defamation laws have been used for slaps, strategic lawsuits against public participation since time immemorial. We have asked for anti-slap legislation that would allow you to fight back when big resources sues you for defamation on an incredibly spurious lawsuit, but runs your cash down because they can take you to court. That kind of tactic, again, is very common against environmentalists and others. So you have libel. You've got defamation, libel, slander. You've got all of those kinds of aspects in civil litigation. Then you've got either criminal jeopardy in terms of, again, C51 or hate speech provisions that could be either from the criminal code or not. What Ezra Levant is up on is something that has to do with his licensure as a lawyer. right? So but I can't remember exactly the phrase right now, but it's with the Human Rights Commission. And again, he's arguing I was making these comments as a journalist, not as a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at these, all of a sudden, we're talking about 7 different laws. So it's not as if we have one pocket that we have deep problems with in terms of civil liberties and freedom of expression. They span the gamut, and we have a number of different remedies that we need to seek, so it's very hard to keep track. And beyond any of this, who gets charged, what happens, are there penalties in terms of consequences relative to finances, there's the chill. When people don't feel like they know what they can say, obviously we have a chill on expression.
Well, what are some of these remedies, or what are some of the things that the average Canadian can start thinking about if they want to try to affect change and get things back to the way they used to be, maybe in a pre-Bill C-51 world? How do people get involved if they want to, see our freedom of speech survive here in Canada and not go down the road that it's going? What can people do?
I think a huge piece of what you can do is talk to people that you know that this is an actual concern, and tell people that this is a concern. British Columbia was one of the first provinces to have anti-slap legislation. It lasted about 8 minutes. It was repealed. Nobody even knew about it. Call on your elected officials and say, we care about this. We want anti-slap legislation. I mean, here we are. We're a democratic country, and people are chilled. We hear this all the time. I'm afraid of demonstrating. I'm afraid of the surveillance. I'm afraid of being flagged as somehow this is going to be prejudicial to my life. Tell the people who you are making your elected representatives that these are your issues. That's what you do.
Welcome back to Canada. I'm glad you're here. Free speech, we're fighting for it not just in Canada, but in other countries too. What's the state of free speech in the West?
I think free speech is in peril throughout the Western world, not just in Canada, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in continental Europe, in some of the oldest, freest societies on earth. Millions and millions of people now think that the government has the right to regulate the speech of individual citizens.
Well, how did it come about? Why is it happening all at once in all these different countries, especially countries that share our roots in the British traditions of John Milton and free speech that go back centuries? Why is it all happening at once?
Well, I think there's a general feeling among the utopian left that somehow there are things you can say and there are things you can't say. And we had this discussion when we took on the Human Rights Commissions. It's a very Canadian argument that, oh, yes, of course I believe in free speech, but it's all a question of where you draw the line, where you strike the balance. The Human Rights Commissioners all say they're in favour of free speech, but they all want to strike a balance. They all want to draw a line.
It's okay to be offensive. That's what free speech is all about. If free speech is only speech you like, it's not free speech.
You're too stupid to tell me what to think.